Hello and welcome to Roli Pulse. I am Chirag Thakkar, commissioning editor at Roli Books. And if you haven't already subscribed to Roli on YouTube, please go to so now and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As the coronavirus pandemic accelerates, the Indian healthcare system is already past its breaking point. Infections are rising alarmingly, hospitals are overloaded and working at significantly lesser staff strength, and securing a bed for COVID and non COVID related healthcare in Indian hospitals in places like Delhi and Bombay have become next to impossible for so many. The situation is nightmarish, to put it mildly. And while we are tracking detected and diagnosed cases and related mortalities, scores of people are dying on streets or at the back of ambulances or in transit trying to secure a hospital that just lets them in. It's safe to say the system has broken down. Was it already broken before Corona? Rewind back to pre COVID times. Was healthcare in India any better, any affordable, or dependable? Were the center and states spending enough on health as the world's largest democracy should have been spending? Do we lack a consistent, robust national healthcare policy? And how is it that if good healthcare in India is accessible, it is not optimal? If it is optimal up to standard, it is simply not affordable. Why do we not have adequate regulations for the private healthcare system? And centrally, the moot question that we are asking today is whether India should nationalize healthcare. Joining me on this panel are Aruna Roy, Vidya Krishnan, and Dr. Ashok Bhatkande. Aruna Roy is one of India's most well-known socio-political activists who resigned from the Indian Administrative Service to work with farmers and the working classes in rural Rajasthan in the 1970s. She's the author of the RTI story, Power to the People, published by Roli Books. In 1990, she helped co-found the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan MKSS, which has been struggling through the 90s for fair wages and other rights that eventually gave birth to the now celebrated Right to Information movement and the act of the same name. Arunaji has been part of many democratic struggles and campaigns such as the right to food, the right to work, etc. We're also joined by Vidya Krishnan, who's a writer and independent journalist with an exclusive focus on health reporting, who's written for The Caravan, The Atlantic, and Al Jazeera. Her first book, Phantom Plague, The Untold Story of How Tuberculosis Shaped Our History, will be published by Public Affairs at Hachette in 2021. Dr. Ashok Bhatkande is here. He's previously been at the Hinduja Hospital and Breach Candy Hospital in Bombay and has taught at Bombay University, the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Johns Hopkins University, and the London School of Economics. So welcome to Roli Pulse, Aruna Ji, Vidya, and Dr. Bhatkande. I'm going to dive straight into this chat. Let me start with Vidya. Vidya, as we all know, is a health reporter. She's had her pulse on the ground. You know, a large part of the work I gather that you do is about tackling the everyday bureaucracy of how badly the healthcare system is doing. You know, what the daily toll is, what are the individual cases. So you have your grip on the macro picture, as it were, as well as the micro picture. How bad is it right now? It's rhetorical, I know, but if you were to give us a perspective which is more informed than the kind of news that we are accessing.
See, I'm very concerned about how bad things are, particularly not just because we do not have the health infrastructure. Historically, we've not invested in this sector, but now when the pandemic is truly taking off in India, in smaller cities, uh, our government is relying on Ayush therapies more. So not only is our intervention to this new pathogen very unscientific, the few people who are getting to hospital are being turned away. There is no infrastructure, and most of all, there is no transparency. And the irony of it all is that this is a pandemic with no cure. It's a newly identified virus, and scientists are still trying to understand the virus. But families are paying through their noses to get bad care, and the hospitals are not being held accountable at this point. If we have to make any dent on the what lies ahead of us in the next 2 months, the first step, according to me, is to start with regulating the private sector. Our public sector cannot cope, and the private sector needs to come to the table and adjust to this new reality that every industry is going through a loss. But as against every industry, they can stop their services. But if private healthcare system start turning away patients, it costs lives. So we immediately and urgently need to have a conversation about how we are going to regulate our private sector, because they have most of the beds. So, in short, that was a longer answer, but the short answer is things are bad.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I want to ask Aruna ji now, and let me start by asking you where you stand on nationalization of healthcare in India. In an earlier conversation, you mentioned that this is a demand you've long articulated for a while now. Could I ask you to elaborate on this?
I'm a rights activist, as you all know. I've fought for and been part of many campaigns asking for rights on information, work, health. We would like to education, food, etc. See, the problem is that this is too big a country to be taken care of by a sector. It has got to be a national program, anything that takes care of any of the issues. What has happened with COVID is that all the fault lines have got exposed. And today, for instance, we just didn't want to see our migrant labor. They're up there in front. You have the biggest numbers of people, twice the amount that were displaced during partition, walking home on the streets. You can't ignore them. So you have to face the fact that there are huge differences between access to basic services between the wealthy and the not wealthy and the very poor. Actually, there is a very important concept which was rubbished, but which has today come to the fore. In the beginning, in 2014, when this government took power, they said that they would keep NREGA and RTI standing as great pillars of infamy of the previous system. But what has helped us today? NREGA has absorbed enormous amounts of labor. In Rajasthan, we are double the amount, catering to the numbers of migrants who have come back. The rights, therefore, rights are not to be viewed as a threat by people who are not activists. They have to see how a system can be made to function because of rights. So I think what we really need is a right to health. We need nationalized services, because after all, people at the lowest, bottommost level of sustenance will only be catered to by a national health program. To diverge a little bit, I had a sister who was very ill with cancer in the UK, and I had a lot to do with the NHS. The NHS is coming for a lot of criticism, but believe me that if it weren't for the NHS, much of England would be much worse off. So therefore, if a country which is in relative terms more affluent than us has to have a program like NHS, why not we? So the concept of a welfare state is critically important. I'm not saying do away with private care, let there be private care, but it can be for those who can afford it or for very specialized cases in which government fails to deliver. But by and large, the 1 point something billion people that we are need a nationalized healthcare, and we need a right to health, which gives us the basic minimum requirements. Today, I don't need to tell you what's happening in Delhi. Very quickly, you all know that ambulances are not reaching for 48 hours. Even private hospitals, I'm not talking of government hospitals, private hospitals. In government hospitals, there's no space because all, the percentage of money we spend on national health, we have now diverted from spending on health, public health, to insurance. Insurance doesn't cover normal everyday diseases. I have hundreds of my friends who become cross-eyed with fatigue because they keep tramping because they feel that there is this insurance. They go to the hospital and they are told, no, you can't treat this, we can't treat that, we can't treat that. And also there is corruption. Corruption in India is a disease which permeates every system. So even if you have privatized systems and insurance, there's corruption there. So what you're dealing with, therefore, is a huge, immense problem, and you've got to do it with people. So if you want to do it with people, then you have to have a campaign, something like all the other rights-based campaigns, where people understand what the systems will deliver, and the system understands that people need them. So it's this extremely important dialogue as equals that will make health deliver in this country, it's not going to be at the cost of giving up your land, your mortgaging everything to go into health. Health debt is one of the biggest debts actually in rural areas. If you see today, lakhs, 2 lakhs, which multiply into several lakhs because of the kind of compound interest they pay to the money lender, is because of health. Health is the biggest debt for most of the friends I have in rural India, workers and so on. So I'll end there, and then we'll talk about the other things that you may be interested in here.
Thank you, Arunaji. Let me bring in Dr. Bhatkande here. Dr. Bhatkande, you've been part of private hospitals for decades. Do you think nationalization for healthcare in a country like India works? And why do you think what you think?
What we call nationalization has to be understood in the right perspective in India. Because we have various services being outsourced even by the government. Say you take, say, the housekeeping services in the parliament, or many ambulance services in various states like Maharashtra, for example. So outsourcing has become the norm in the public sector. So that doesn't really create employment. Or so nationalization in that form, where the government does not actively participate to create a service which everyone would be proud of, it is no nationalization at all. Now, if let's keep corona situation, it's an unusual situation which has not happened in many decades. So obviously, in a situation like this, the healthcare infrastructure cannot cope up. But if you see, India's situation is very different. If I look at a matrix of, say, need, resource, and utilization, there is a high healthcare need, no doubt. The resources which are deployed for meeting that need are mainly from the private sector as of now. If you compare the investment made by the private sector with the investment made by the government, there is a big disparity. And in spite of whatever government may have invested in healthcare, the utilization of government services is very poor. We find that most of the people are spending out of pocket far more than any other country. So they are paying out of pocket not only for the private sector, but they are paying out of pocket even for the public sector. So in a situation like this, I would say that the starting point would be, how can we increase the utilization of our existing nationalized the public sector services? Unless we improve the utilization, putting in more resources in the form of nationalization is not going to work. So by and large, I would say that Indian healthcare system is not bad. I'm comparing that with other healthcare system. I have experiences from the US, from the Canada, from say UK, where people are still not happy with their healthcare models. Compared to that, I think we have good doctors, we have good hospitals, and uh, uh, we are able to manage with this mix of private and public sector.
And you don't think nationalization in that sense is warranted, like this mixed public
Nationalization in No nationalization. I accept Aruna's point of right to health. Right to health is something different. Nationalization is completely different. See, nationalization would mean, in some form, buying out the private assets. I don't know how the government is going to do that. So, with the current investment, we stepping up the investment in healthcare sector is not a viable option at all. So I would look at first utilize care, then not about regulating the healthcare industry. I would say that regulating, fine. I mean, I'm not against regulating the healthcare industry, but then government needs to set up some example where it can prove that they have the ability to regulate the private sector.
Okay.
So unless that is done, yeah. So so in that sense, yes, I mean, nationalization is not the answer for our healthcare problems.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Vidya, do you agree, and why? And I also want to sort of add to that, make it a two-pointed question. We have national universal healthcare policies such as Ayushman Bharat, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, as do the states in the form and the shape that is suitable to them. So what's work and what's not work in India's healthcare system, and what are the problems? What are the pain points?
So I actually feel that the answer that Sir gave here was he basically didn't answer directly what you were asking. Firstly, it's not really a hypothetical situation anymore. We have a pandemic, so we can't just wish away the pandemic out of the argument and discuss this new reality. Secondly, he said that there is a huge disparity between public and private investments in the sector, and which is why private healthcare sector kind of has a right, because he also said that the government has to prove to the private sector that it's worthy of regulating this sector. So I kind of want to break that down, because this is similar. These are the kind of arguments that are being made not just in India but even across the world, where again, sir compared us to specifically countries with extremely privatized healthcare. US is a great example. Canada is not an example of that. So the answer was kind of modified to a very specific scenario, whereas we in India have 1.3 billion people right now who are desperate for healthcare need, which comes back to his point about first prove utilization. Every day I'm reading in hospitals that 5 patients and 6 patients have been turned away and hospitals are not letting them enter. But the private sectors, first you have to prove utilization. Now, the problem with an argument that is engineered and structured in this very specific way is that first it addresses only the rich healthcare seeker. So you may get a good care if you're rich, but why is that our lowest denominator? When there are so many people on the streets. Secondly, it does not stand the scrutiny of a very simple fact check that private sector invests more. In fact, if India's largest and the oldest chain of private hospitals is Indraprastha Apollo, with Apollo Malar in Chennai being the first privatized hospital set up in 1983. And since then, the hospital in Sarita Vihar, 1 rupee per month, the land lease was. The hospital does not give electricity and utility bills. And Delhi government owns 26% stake in the hospital, but they don't advertise in Hindi that patients can come in. So private hospitals take viability gap funding, they take industry scale subsidies, rebates. They do not pay utilities at market price, and they do not pay taxes at market price. So if we were a functioning democracy where people were interests of the greater public health would be represented, the first thing we would do is every private hospital which benefited from taxpayer largesse, be it 1980s onwards. This sector has been around since 1983, when the first privately funded hospitals were allowed in India legally. Everyone who's benefited from taxpayer largesse should open up their hospitals. It is a great moment of shame that Azim Premji is turning a floor into 400-bedded hospitals, whereas private hospitals with all those beds are bean counting at a point when people are dying. I'm going to take about this whole point of how the government must prove to an industry that they can regulate. It already shows the situation that we are in. The Indian population are medical hostages right now. Government has nothing to prove. All of these hospitals, like Rajan Dhal Hospital in Basant Kunj, was donated to the family of Colonel Rajan Dhal, who was a Kargil war veteran, and land given such can only be used for charitable purposes. But that trust was, the land was given to Fortis, which runs now a for-profit hospital. If the private hospital owners really need to have some transparency, they have to come to the table in good faith, understanding that they got 40 years of self-regulation, in which they ran roughshod of every PPP, every viability gap funding, and every taxpayer money that was invested in them. And now when there is this moment of unprecedented crisis, They are saying our balance sheets matter. It's petty, it's unkind, it's not morally correct, and most of all, it is not economically justified. This doesn't stand the fact check. I hope I broke that down point by point.
No, you did, and we'll come back. We'll come back to the issue of the private healthcare sector not being regulated enough, and try and also look at the argument on the other side that that they're bleeding out is what they're saying. We'll just come back to that, but I want to go to Aruna ji now and ask whether this is a kind of problem of the upper middle classes and the privileged, the wealthy classes that don't want to be treated alongside the underprivileged and the poor. Is it a class problem in that sense? And because the privileged have access to quality healthcare, they haven't been bothered enough about not having good public healthcare for others. Is it something? How do you reconcile with this?
Actually, let me look at the provision of health by Kerala. And let me start from there. Kerala's health system is by and large government managed. There are some private hospitals, of course, but there are also Ayurvedic hospitals about which we all know a lot. But government of Kerala's health services have managed not only COVID, but they've managed most of their health services. And I know that no matter whether you're a minister in Kerala or whether you are a worker in Kerala, you will first go to your government hospital. I think we are not class driven so much in our choice of healthcare if we are well off, as we are by the notion of adequate or excellent care. The point is that there's a figurative, I think it's figurative credit which we give to private healthcare because we think private healthcare is that much more efficient largely because of the notion of cleanliness and hygiene. And we think a clean hospital is never possible if it's a government hospital. Government hospitals are always very dirty, and therefore we should go to a private hospital. But Kerala has proven that you can have a clean public hospital and you can have delivery. And actually there have been instances even in Rajasthan, which is a fairly backward state, of clean and well-maintained PHCs catering to people and people going there. So it's not so much class. I think it's a concept of hygiene that may be a factor in which it makes us decide what is worse or what is better. But I think Kerala should actually be studied for healthcare, just as it should be studied for many other things, because I think it's one of the most excellently run states in India. As an ex-bureaucrat, I would at some point in time have talked about Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra, but today as an activist I speak of Kerala, because they've activated every single rung of the health system, whether it's the ASHA worker, even involving the self-help groups, which are called Kudumbashri, involving the panchayats, involving the entire system in catering to health in a crisis like COVID. They've also set up and have had reports because of their previous interface with a very lethal epidemic that attacked them before. They have set up laboratories to function and to identify. Why is it not possible? Of course it's possible. But what I think I would totally agree with Ashok is about is that government is no longer government. Government talks about being government, but actually government is partly privatized. I feel sometimes to bring in a note of levity into the whole thing, that if they could, they would really auction all the posts of chief secretaries, chief ministers and everything and get it somewhere else, because this kind of great mania for pushing things out of the system is extraordinary, because there has to be somewhere where the buck stops, where the responsibility is accepted. So I think the reputation, when I was very young in Delhi, I grew up in Delhi, I went to university in Delhi, and I know that Safdarjung Hospital, which was a government hospital, had a fantastic reputation long before All India Institute came to be. And as a young person, I was never taken to a private hospital. I only went to government hospitals. And we thought that was the best that we could get. Of course, you wanted a good physician to see you or a good surgeon to see you. That, of course, was always a problem. But my problem, rather than the problem of the physician or the system. But I think certainly you can cater to these things. And class, we have a class issue everywhere in this country today. And the class issue is so loaded against the people who are poor. You know that so much, 70% of the wealth of this country is in the hands of 1% of India or 10% of India, depending on what range you take. So most of us are poor if you go by that. And most of us would really go to public health system. And then if it is going to be a debate between public health and national health, or whether it is going to be a right to health or national health, or whether we should have also privatized hospitals and what role they play, why isn't there a debate? My concern as a citizen is, why isn't it a matter of public debate? Why isn't every interested, literate individual, and there are many now in this country, entering this debate? And I'm going to end with one story. I remember very vociferously asking for public health, and a person telling me that you speak for public health because you are privileged. And I said, it's an antidote. I mean, how are you saying that? Because it's not quite right what you're saying. And they said, no, because you must experience what is happening in a hospital. So we have to also look at the corruption in our public system, and the corruption. There's legalized corruption in a privatized hospital because you're paying through your nose for everything, which doesn't cost that much money. And in a government hospital, you have to bribe your way from the jamadar who cleans your bed to or changes your pot, or to the right up to the top to get special attention. And we are allowing this complete duality to exist. I think somewhere we have to bring in regulations, I'm afraid, and they have to be uniform regulations for everybody. There should be no private or public sector. You should have to look at what is delivered uniformly. And there must be some rationality in the kind of fees that are charged, even by private sector. But I think all this should be up there for public debate, no matter what my biases are. And what I've listed are not just my concerns. It's our concerns I keep listening to from various kinds of people when I talk at various points, whether it's the chai dukaan or the bus adda, or whether it's a sitting room in Delhi. What I hear, I'm trying to tell you that these are the concerns. But why is it for India there has never been a concern for discussing public health as a public issue? It hasn't been. And I think the first thing we should really push, and that's why a campaign is important, that's why a Right to Health campaign is important, because what we managed to do is to push it into the public domain and make it an issue of public concern, for public debate. What the conclusion will be, I can't say, but certainly we'll get a much better deal than we have today for health for all of us as citizens.
Right, that's very well said. I'll come back to this thing about right to health and why it's important that we have a debate. But I want to move to Dr. Bhatkande and ask that one of the arguments in this debate against national healthcare is that it weakens federalism and the states' abilities to form, articulate, and implement their own health policies, plan their own health team. Right, and health already is a state subject in India. So, do you think a national healthcare policy goes against federal politics and federal principles? And second, it is also argued that the market and private healthcare players would help regulate and stabilize the pricing of treatment with healthy competition. So, if you've had a private player overcharging you, you would have the option of going to a more affordable private facility where you can be sure of no extortion. Why is it that in healthcare, healthy competition has not given us the desired result of regulation?
Okay, let me start with the first one. Health is a state subject, no doubt. So in that sense, if I look at the term nationalization, see, nationalization would also include having a federal control over the healthcare, so that all the smaller forms of government, they come under one umbrella and they are controlled by one agency. So that itself is a nationalization in that sense. Making health a state subject, there are a lot of problems that are created by that. I don't know if you are aware of, for example, I'll give you one example. Today in India, we have, say a drug is banned in one state. Like say Maharashtra FDA finds that some drug has spurious contents and Maharashtra FDA bans that drug. That ban is applicable only for the state. That means that supplier or the manufacturer can continue supplying to all other states where the ban is not imposed. Whereas if it comes to permitting someone to manufacture a drug, only one state can permit the manufacture, and then that drug can be supplied all over the country. So we have disparities like this between the control of the state and the control of the federal control. I think they need to be addressed first. One of the things to remember is that healthcare is a different kind of commodity. It is not, I mean, it's one is the only commodity where the provider decides what the consumer needs, and the consumer has no say in the matter over what he should be given, whether it is a particular, say, surgery or a particular diagnostic test or whatever it is. So consumer does not know anything, and he has no way of judging the quality of the service that was provided for him. I'm talking of only the medical care component. And therefore, self-regulation by the hospital industry is very essential. There can be a public-private participation in that sense so that everyone works together. Regulation should be preceded, first of all, by defining what the standard of care should be. And I think it's in today's world of evidence-based medicine and the way we practice in the Western world, standardization of medical care and regulating the pricing structure, etc., is possible. I don't see that as a very difficult proposition at all. But there has to be a good participation of both public and private sector to be able to do that. Some of the things where healthcare is different from the other, besides what I just said, is in the sense that, see, there is a large hospitality component in healthcare. So when I'm providing healthcare, I'm not just providing medical care alone. I have to feed the patient, I have to look after all his bed and linen and the hospital, the disinfection and so on. So there are many hospitality services which are produced along with the medical care. The management of these is very complex. And today in the government sector where, like India produces a lot of talent through all the IIMs and IITs, etc. But that is not a qualification to get into any government, in any government hospital. Yeah? So as a, say, administrator of the public sector. So I think, we need to look at what is available in the country, deploy that talented manpower. And then there are disparities, like, for example, if I look at, say, private hospital, most of the private hospitals, our bed to manpower ratio would be, say, 1:6. That means there are 6 people working for one bed. And that ratio in the public sector would be very low, like 2.53, which doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So I would say that the standardization would, laying down standards will benefit both the public and the private sector. So wherever the public sector is deficient in terms of deployment of resources, they can improve those resource deployments. And as regards the pricing side, which the private sector, yes, there are malpractices in the private sector, no doubt. Just as there is corruption in the government, there is corruption in the private sector as well. I think that is a malady that we have to live with in India. So regulation certainly will help in that sense. I hope I have.
Right. Well, yeah, you tried to, not the competition bit, but perhaps I can relay that question to Vidya in a two-pointed question to her, that how is it that in healthcare with healthy competition, pricing is still not being regulated, which is why, perhaps there is no national regulation, because you had hoped that self-regulation of the sector would work, right? Allowing a healthy just like in the media, you don't really have that kind of central body that looks at regulating the media. You're always insisting on regulation in the press. So why is it that competition has not worked in healthcare? And the other question I want to ask is that how is it that regulation has still not been a priority? Because we've had private healthcare for a while now. And the pandemic, in that sense, has exposed the unaffordability of healthcare, right in our faces. So you've also had these owners of private hospitals and promoters of private hospitals giving interviews that they're bleeding out, that they're not able to keep it together, the costs are very high, they're unable to take care of keeping the hospitals running, paying the staff. Does regulation make sense then?
Well, I quickly want to point out one thing that seems to be missing. We keep saying there's no regulation, when in fact India has the Clinical Establishments Act, which very specifically lays out standard operating protocols, whether you run a neighborhood GP or a superstar special hospitality facility. The unfortunate part is that it's been the states have to ratify it, and the private hospital lobby groups, including the Indian Medical Association, has tooth and nail ensured that this law is not implemented where it's ratified. In most states, it's not ratified. So laws exist. Secondly, standardization of pricing is something that the government, if you had a negotiating table in which civil society and patient groups had a say, and we were not being dictated policy by owners of private hospitals like Dr. Devi Shetty or Dr. Naresh Trehan or Pratap Reddy, then at least there is some representation of public interest, which has not happened. The second bit is that this no country in the world allows their health sector to self-regulate. No sector in the world openly demands for it as if it is entitled to it, because it has such brilliant track record of treating people so well that it has earned the doctor-patient trust in this country is at its low, not just for the poor. The poor, I want to make one point which remains limited in the public health community, but Aruna ji said it. This is known as medical apartheid, and there is a book written about it which is called Medical Apartheid, and it's set in the US, where there is a very specific, the literature and data has been studied as to how the neighborhoods that you live in contribute to health deficits because of the hospital and healthcare services that you have access to. In fact, if you go to a government hospital in India and you're poor, there is a medical apartheid because you're undertreated. If you're rich, you're overtreated. So nobody is happy. It's not like rich patients walk into hospitals feeling safe. They are vulnerable and they're primed for exploitation, and they are exploited. Now, which comes to your question about why the market, the free market and the capitalistic solutions haven't worked in this sector, simply because our government, instead of batting for us and representing the people, is batting for the private sector. We've seen this with pharma, and we have seen this with hospital industries, where there is a lot of emotive aspect. I am procuring a service at a time of emotional crisis. Someone I love needs urgent medical attention. This is not stuff that I know about, so I have to trust the doctor's opinion on it. And the doctor needs to be held accountable by the laws of the country. We need to act as a community, because if I'm not safe, then no one, patients don't have rights, because the doctors set the rights. India has a medical council, and I don't know if you remember, Justice Verma passed away right after Vishaka guidelines. His daughter took Naresh Trehan to court. Gopal Subramanian and the leading lawyers in the country wrote to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh at that point. And later, when I was reporting on the story, Justice Verma's daughter told me that even for my father, there is no justice in this country, because doctors do not rat on doctors when medical negligence cases go not to courts but to medical councils. So the fact that the private sector still wants self-regulation baffles my mind at the lack of self-awareness as to how much harm it's causing, even to the rich, even to the powerful. And they still want self-regulation. What the only good idea I've heard because of this pandemic, and I really hope it gets more attention, and I for sure will be writing about it, is when patients started getting turned away at, I want to say Delhi, but it was either Delhi or Mumbai. There was this whole Twitter trend started by a doctor saying we need one nation, one health scheme. The only way to fix this caste and class bias, which is reflected in our hospitals, is by ensuring that the rich get the same facility as the poor. As of today, even Satyendra Jain is admitted at Max. Why can you, the RML's dean is admitted at a private facility? If you do not trust your own government hospitals, how are you for sending a captive audience forcing them into a private sector where they don't know English, they are treated badly, doctors do not treat them with dignity, and they are paid more. And I know of cases where private hospitals had this is last year, a private hospital, very well-known doctor who's on TV every day, held the body of a 6-year-old girl hostage for 6 days, saying he will not return the body to the parents unless the bill is settled. And who's deciding these bills? This is daylight robbery. This would be criminal if we had a government which would act in public interest at a time of pandemic, and none of this is due. Tuberculosis patients in the country, HIV patients in the country have been screaming from rooftops about stigma, about lack of care. You get these diseases, like this is a country which is famous. If you go into our medical history, we are the only country in the world which had leper colonies, as against every other country which was treating them with dignity and curing this. And that is exactly the kind of caste and class bias which is today reflecting, where doctors are the Brahmins of the system. And let me tell you, I have some of my closest friends who work in this sector. It doesn't work for honest doctors. It doesn't work for honest medical students. It definitely doesn't work for patients. It only works for doctor businessmen who keep saying how feasible it is. We cannot run it. We are bleeding money. But look at Ranbaxy and Fortis, Malvinder Singh and Shivinder Singh kept saying for years that Fortis is running losses. Firstly, Fortis is running losses. Figure your stuff out and don't pass on the cost to the end customer, because he's coming in with a kid who's about to die. This is not a fair deal. Secondly, when the criminal charges were brought against them and Sunlight, they don't open their books for audits. And thankfully, because of a whistleblower, when Ranbaxy, some sunlight was shown on it, the two brothers had been siphoning off money from the hospital and patients for decades while saying, oh, this is not a feasible sector. They had taxpayer money had been funneled into FMRI. They had set up Medicity. Don't set up a Medicity, run a smaller hospital, but at least treat the person who's coming into your facility with some dignity, with like, that is a person who's somebody's father, somebody's brother, somebody's daughter, and that life matters. And medicine cannot change because they don't have money on it. And again, I keep coming back, this is not an economic argument. As a society, we have to decide where is the moral line for us here, because if you're poor, does the medicine change for you? Do you get bad care? And there is this whole talk of how there should be bridge courses for doctors and they should be sent into poor villages. If you're poor, you have a right constitutionally to scientific progress. You cannot just send half-baked doctors into villages. I will not go to a facility. If I have a child, I will not take it to a half-baked quack who doesn't know what to do if I'm delivering and I have a hemorrhage. All of the solutions that are being given to us are given by people who have all the power, and they don't want to. I'm just going to finish it. This is my last point. For the people to win, the people in power will have to be ready to lose some power, which they are just not ready to. They don't want to open themselves to audits. They don't want to open to price caps. They don't want them to open to medical litigation. And at some point, this argument is so unequal that this is the kind of fight which is filling out with deaths on the streets.
Thank you, Vidya. That's very, very well said. I will move to Aruna ji now and talk about two issues. One is capacity building, and the other is whether a right to health. Let's say there is this thing gathers momentum, right, and the movement translates actually to policy and a law, and a fundamental right which gives us right to health. Although the Supreme Court in instances has come in and interpreted articles of the Constitution to life and liberty and extended access to healthcare in the spirit of the Constitution. So whether an act or a policy will actually mean something on ground, right? Or because you've also, over the years, we've seen the kind of disillusion with right to information. We've seen successive governments trying to weaken its own promises. And today, right to information happens to be at a place where every successive government has done enough in their capacity to try and weaken it. So does a right to health naturally lead to good healthcare? So that's one. And the other question about capacity building, as I was saying, it's become such a big issue, especially in the pandemic. The government has been spending about 1.2 to about 1.4% of India's GDP on health. Before the pandemic, a World Economic Forum study said that India needed 40 million health workers by 2030, and that it needs double the number of doctors, thrice the number of nurses, and quadruple the number of paramedic and support staff. And then there is a WHO benchmark of one doctor for at least 1,000 patients, and we were lagging behind before the pandemic at something like 0.65 is 2,000 patients. And I don't even know what the number is like right now. How do we ensure we meet these numbers for a country as large as ours? And whether a right to healthcare will naturally lead to good healthcare?
Let me just say that whether I see health from the point of view of a governance issue sitting in any one of the Sachivalayas, or if I see it as a very poor person sitting in a village who's had a serious accident or has a huge health issue and goes to a government hospital, I feel basically it's an issue of governance. And I think to some extent, I think you've covered it, Vidya, because you say that it's all about power. So the point is that in India, we are a very power-centric society, and we just hate to disband that power. We hate to have decentralization of power. We have dislike everything that it goes by the name of decentralization. So actually, it's a huge fight to get any kind of decentralization going in this country, even for healthcare. So whether you talk about healthcare or you're talking about NREGA, or whether you're talking about the right to information, decentralization of power is a big issue. And we have in the last 7 years seen greater and greater centralization of power. We have seen greater and greater opaqueness of governance. The reason is very obvious, because you don't want to share power, you don't want to share responsibility, you don't want to be accountable. So the best thing is to say that even the PM care, whatever comes in the name of the PM, is under wrap. I mean, it's extraordinary for me that money I give the government for my own care, and I can't ask, how have you spent the money? I mean, let's get back to basics. So really and truly, healthcare for me would actually be an issue of governance. That's why a right to health program. A right to health says I am a sovereign citizen of this country and I have a right to health. No matter who comes to power is answerable to me. So it changes the power equation, and it changes the accountability system from a government just reporting, not even to the CAG, because the CAG doesn't need to be reported about the PM care. So if a government and if a prime minister can say audaciously that that money will not even be visible to the CAG, and the entire literate part of India, the so-called very educated, have not made a single noise. The ones who got really upset are either the right to information activists or the ordinary citizen who sees this as another way of slowly unpacking the powers that we have got, the little bit of power we've got, through transparency and accountability. Right to information is not dead. Right to information is attacked now, very basically. But we will fight, because those 6 million to 8 million people who use RTI know the taste of power now. They know exactly how power can be misused against them. They will fight. They will fight their own battles. You don't have to have a campaign or a movement. They understand how valuable it is. Similarly, people who taste the right to health will fight, and there will be many more millions. So many people will understand how this health system works. They'll understand the meaning of modern medicine. See, today what has happened in rural areas is that from a transfixed attitude of complete faith towards bhopajis and over, mantras and tantras, have shifted to the jadoo of the doctor. But one has to understand that the doctor is also a human being and works within a system of what? Of a theory, of an understanding, of a knowledge base. Dr. P.K. Sethi was a very eminent orthopedician who lived in Rajasthan, who used to say in all his meetings with us The doctor at best knows 8% to 10% of the human body. The rest is still guesswork for us because human science has not progressed. This is 20 years ago. Maybe today you can increase the percentage, but still much of what is happening in the body is still a mystery. So the point is to transfer one magic with another magic is what's happened in rural India. So government hospitals or private hospitals or the dispensary has become a jadoo. And they say with great pride, हमने तो इतने लाख रुपए खर्च किया हमारे मरीज पे, which means that they have given them the best care. And they will say drip chada dijiye, because the drip is seen as a kind of elixir of life. So we need to educate them about what is this allopathic system? What is this medicine? What does it do to you? What are the components of that medicine? Why do I not take a certain pill? Why do I feel that certain things are not good for me? Why do you see an overdose as a problem? You see, that system of education is totally missing. Right to health will bring in medical education for the people. They will understand that system of health, and I think that's why it's very important. Transparency and accountability, the other flip side of any right. If you have any right, then you have to have transparency and accountability, and it brings that. The capacity you need to build today, the capacity of how to use all your health workers in the system, first educate them, and through them do great public education on health. And the health is least understood, by the way, of all the various services we get from government. The least understood. You need to have packages where you understand how to deal with health, how to deal even with snake bites or the million other things that people are afflicted to, including COVID today. So I think my argument, therefore, for a right to health emanates from this whole thing. It's the best way to educate the people, and ultimately they may demand, and they will probably demand, national health. Now, they will also probably ask for some private hospitals, because people are full of common sense. They are not driven by any kind of partial ideology. No matter even if they have an ideological base in their voting pattern, they still are driven by common sense. And if the common sense dictates to them that they need to have some privatization, then ask for it. And this kind of pseudo-nationalism that Ashok talked about, that where you have so-called public health services with everything outsourced. We have a song which we sing in the MKSs where we say that the private doctor, the public doctor will not even feel your pulse, but the same doctor, when he's a private doctor, feels your pulse because you allow them private practice. So when in the dispensary, he won't feel even your pulse, but he'll give you a medicine, prescribe it. But when you go to his house behind the hospital, then he feels your pulse, then he put the stethoscope on your chest, and you feel a million things. So we are not bought by this hypocrisy that is projected as national health. So that means education will bring in more integrity into the health system and bring in a better system for all of us. So that's why I think right to health is vital.
Thank you, Arunaji. I think that's very, very articulate. And that's it for us on time. Thank you, Aruna Roy, Dr. Bhatkande, Vidya Krishnan, for being part of this discussion. I've really, really enjoyed talking to all of you. For everyone who's watching, please subscribe to Rolly Books on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please follow us on social media so that you get to know more stuff that we put out. Stay safe and #BelieveInBooks.